By now, everybody knows that Brian Koberger has pled guilty, and we've gone through a million machinations of whether or not he was or he wasn't guilty. And I know a lot of people in America still ask the question, why would a man plead guilty if he wasn't guilty? What I wanted to do today is I wanted to take a moment to talk to Jason Estes from the Estes Crime Maze. We had a great conversation with him before, in which one of the things that we talked about was the possibility that Koberger was, for example, a Fed, that he was actually, that this was somehow planned to get him on the inside of prison. That was just one of many. I also have done a video in the past of my top 10 theories, or maybe it was it was 27. I think it was 27 things that I thought I've heard out there that could have been an explanation for what happened in the house that night. What I want to do is I want to bring Jason Estes up here to talk about a lot of those theories, because in my take on this, what I want to do today is kind of say, look, in my opinion, now this is just my opinion, and Jason may disagree on this, I'll bring him up in just a moment, is that this case is over. There will be no trial. We've got a guilty plea. No one's going to be brought to justice. There isn't going to be a miraculous last minute plea deal. There's not going to be, in my opinion, that's not going to happen. So what I want to do is I want to talk to Jason about that, and I want to get his opinions on all the different theories, or at least a lot of the different theories that have been out there, to say, let's walk through them now. Now that we know that the case is over, essentially, let's talk about all those different theories and which one of them do we think really had meat, and what at the end of the day, with no trial, is going to be what we're stuck with or from this point forward. So let me bring him on up on screen. Hey, Jason, let's see. Let's get you unmuted. How you doing today?
Excellent, outstanding, and trying to work unspectacularly, Mr. Devil's Advocates. And I think with you doing this video today, I think it will be spectacular. Appreciate you asking, and appreciate the opportunity to be on with you today to discuss the crazy, wild, I don't even know what other words to use, but it is an absolute wild, crazy case of the Idaho 4.
It is absolutely, you're right, and I dig your vibe. I always really dig your vibe. For a long time, you and I again have been trying to work something out to do something more regularly. I like your vibe. I like your style. You're
Thank
you're
you.
a little.
You
I
too.
mean, to be fair, you're a little bit further down some of the theories that I am, but that's what I wanted to talk to you today about. Is some of those areas, like, because I mean everybody's heard me talk. What we want to hear today is, in addition, what do you think? So I'd like to get some ideas with you and bounce some things off of you, if you don't mind, on the whole. What I'm going to do is I'm going to save my personal theory, my most likely, and people may know where it's already going to be, but I'm going to tell you my most likely theory about what really happened. Now that it's going to be no trial, I'm just going to say, this is what I think really happened that night. I'm going to save that towards the end. Maybe you could do the same thing in the back of your mind, kind of save this is what I actually think happened. And then before that, though, let's cover all these different scenarios, right? And if I happen to, when I'm pitching a scenario to talk about, that you want to put that on hold, then just say, let's put that one on hold and let's talk about something else. So, I think you probably followed this. You followed this case a lot, right? From the
Oh, yeah.
beginning,
Yes.
right? So, I wanted to
Not
ask you
quite
about
the
this
beginning, but
thought.
almost the beginning.
Okay, so one of the early thoughts, one of the earliest thoughts in this case was this was a drug retaliation hit, right? There was a lot of talk about two of the girls in the house, their family members had testified against maybe the Fetty brothers or some criminal element, that they had turned state's evidence and put some guys in jail, and that as a retaliation, because they couldn't reach to the parents, they killed their children to send a message. What are your thoughts on that as a likely scenario, what happened here in this situation?
Great question. I think the other term, the name you were alluding to, is confidential informant, correct? A lot of
Yes.
people have mentioned, right, about a
Right.
confidential informant.
Yes.
Absolutely. And I think there probably was. And I think there was at least one, most likely, living at 1122 King Road. I suspect Kaylee very well may have been a confidential informant. Who knows? Maybe Dylan or Bethany. We'll get into the two roommates that survived. I mean, this is unheard of. And four supposedly stabbed, unalived. But yes, I think somebody had it out for all four students, Lee, Devil's Advocates. Absolutely. The question I have is, did the hit really take place? And I'll have the answer to that, as you say, near the end of the video, and we'll both
Well, let
tell
me
our
ask you
thoughts on
this. I mean, one of the
it.
early
Sure.
problems that I had with the hit idea, my first initial problem was, why not just take out the person who turned you over? Why not hit the parents? Why, and the counter to me was, well, it hurts more to take your children out, right? It sends a bigger message. And my counter to that counter was, yes, but that that would only be true, in my opinion, if that person was still useful to you. In other words, if you so you know, you got ratted on by somebody, but they're still useful to you, so you don't want to kill them. You want to kill somebody close to them to send a message: don't do that shit again, but I still need you. Is there Have you ever had any thoughts about that? Like, why didn't they just, if it was a drug hit, if it was because parents involved with these daughters, these girls, turned somebody in, and it was a retaliation, why not just kill the people who ratted them? In addition, or at least, even if it was to kill their kids too, why not kill their entire family? Why not also kill the person who ratted you out?
I I agree. That's a great question. I think because Lee, I don't know if you saw the videos where the parents, if you believe that gang members had it out for the parents, possibly, and that very well could be. First of all, a lot of gang bangers, right? Living in Moscow, Idaho, Washington State, they're all over the place. Not that they're all evil people, but if they had it out for the parents, though, there's videos showing you there was security detail in front of the parents' house. So if gangbangers or cartel members had it out for one or more parents, and that might be Karen Norlington, right, the stepmom, or Maddie's apparently stepmom, they were all involved in drugs and had deals after deals apparently, but they may not have been able to get to the parents, is my point. And if that's the
Yeah.
case, then yes, they might go after the kids, because unfortunately that is part of the intimidation and sometimes protocol we know of cartel organizations, right, and gangbangers. But that still doesn't prove that any hit got carried out on these students. And as a matter of fact, Steve G, who I normally don't believe, and we can get into him in this video if you want, devil's advocates, but Steve G, I think he told you the truth when he admitted in 2 interviews, at least 1 interview, the feds had surveillance all over the house, the neighborhoods. Hello. So my question is, how could they get to those students? Are the U.S. Marshals that lazy? You're not going to try to extract those students, get them the hell out of there? We got to ask those hard questions that most people, I think, don't want to ask. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, and I think you bring up a good point, which was that, is there a possible scenario in your mind that if it was a confidential informant protected by the government, they're going to rat out against a drug cartel, and I'm not even sure if I want to use cartel. That's an overused word. It could just be drugs
Sure,
running through Moscow that isn't necessarily a cartel per se. But let's say it was a
sure.
confidential informant, and if, like you say, if they were under surveillance, or if one of the girls that was the daughter of one of the people that are a confidential informant was being protected, and they fucked up and let her get killed right in front of them, is there an incentive on their part to hide the whole, oops, we fucked up and let a confidential informant's family member get killed or whatever? And would that lead to them going down some rabbit hole of allowing a whole wrong narrative to be put in place, just so they don't have to admit that they let one of their CI's family members get murdered, or what, you know?
That's a very interesting speculation, as you always provide, Lee, when you do speculate. That's titillating and tantalizing revelations that you just mentioned right there. I've never thought of it quite that way, and I guess that's possible. But I don't think you have to go there. I think, in all likelihood, I mean, we saw Kaylee and Maddie at the grub truck. They were under threat. They were protected by that Jack. Everyone was wondering, and I did for the longest time too, why is Jack, hovering over the girls? Is he a bodyguard? Is he protect? We know that he was protecting them. In some way, he was protecting those girls, whether it be Kaylee's boyfriend said, the girls are going out tonight. He told the other Jack, you protect them. So those girls were under some sort of threat. But I don't think there's any evidence. Again, you go back, Lee, there's no evidence, devil's advocates, that those girls, 1 or more, were even taken out. And I could go through the questions anytime you want. You let me know. I'll go through the questions to ask, and then I'll
I
answer
think
those questions for you guys.
I
Yeah.
think for
I hope I
now, I
answered
think
that
for
somewhat.
now,
Yes.
yeah, I think for now on this part of the conversation, let's go with the assumption that the kids really did die. I understand that we are going to talk. We are going to talk about the possibility that maybe nobody died, or maybe the attackers got killed, whatever. There's a lot of different theories. I mean, there's a million theories, but let's
Cool.
let's go for the moment that the kids did die. and whether
Sure.
or not it makes sense that it was a drug retaliation message to the family for ratting out people. If it, you know, if that did happen right under the eyes of protective forces that were watching, and would they collude with local law enforcement to essentially, which you basically have to go down the rabbit hole, is either Koberger was part of the hit team that was working for the drug cartel or the drug thing, or the government or the feds literally allowed some innocent man to be framed for something just to cover up their oh shit that they let a CI get killed.
Mm.
That's where I kind of like, well, which one makes sense? Would they go to the level of letting somebody take the fall for something that they didn't do just so they can cover up an oh shit, we should have protected them? You know, what were your thoughts about that?
I think that's possible, but I think. Do you like me saying devil's advocates or your real name Lee?
Either one works for me. Some people call me
Oh,
DA, some people call me devil's advocate. DA
DA.
works, Lee works, anything. Yeah, yeah.
Hey, I'll say DA is your nickname too, DA.
It's easy.
And
Yeah,
again, I really appreciate this opportunity, us bouncing ideas off one another. You ask amazing questions. And by the way, I got to check out that whole video of the 27 malcolmations, I think, as you
yeah,
put on the different theories. I'll definitely
yeah.
look at that. Um, but today, I think, DA, that there was a confidential informant that most likely was compromised. Yes. And when that happens, as I'll describe how we can know this, that legally the feds can stage a violent event if that happens. They can stage unalivings, folks. Okay?
Right,
The audience
right,
needs to know that. And most YouTubers don't want to go down that route. So I think
right.
that's what we could be dealing with here and are. I'm sort of giving away, I don't want to give away too much. We'll say more at the end.
Yeah.
Sorry, can you ask that question more if I didn't answer it accurately there?
It was more along the lines of, if it was a retaliation hit, and the feds were watching them to try to protect them, and would the feds go to the level of framing an innocent person just to cover up the oh shit, we should have protected this person's family and we don't want to admit that we screwed up and they got killed right under our surveillance? Would they go to the levels of framing somebody innocent just so they can cover their
Yes.
oh shit?
I think so. I think so, but you don't have to go there because I think Brian Koberger, personally, I've been thinking about this for a long time, that he was an intelligence asset. We know he wanted to enroll in the police department. That's the giveaway, I think, Lee,
Yeah,
DA. And also, we know, and I think Bertie's talked about it, maybe you have as well, that they will enroll in very intelligent people at times in high academic positions. Think about a Koberger, right? This professor, and then he has his professor coming on, the famous professor that interviewed the BTK and wrote books. I forget her name, Kathleen Ramsfield or whatever her name was. And then she says, it's all part of the psyop, I believe. Oh, I can't believe that Brian did this. And she came on mainstream media. I think Brian Koberger was an actor in this. He's the perfect patsy, the perfect distraction. It was all pre-planned. The feds knew what they were doing, right? All the drug investigations going on covertly. Maybe Brian Koberger also helped with that as part of his role at first, but then he knew his role, and his role was to be used as the fall guy. Oh, this Brian Koberger stabbed, right, all four healthy students, and cars out front, right, two surviving roommates he left behind. I mean, it's crazy. None of that makes sense in mainstream media. They don't want to ask any of those questions or make any of those statements,
well,
and
let me
use
try to
reason,
tie
logic, common sense.
a few things together for the audience that may not be familiar with Koberger's
Please do.
past and how he got to WSU and stuff like that, and maybe tie it together with your theory and my theory on the fly. So here's where I want to go with this. For those who don't know, Brian Koberger started out in psychology and then basically decided during some classes, the story goes, that he had more interest in criminology. And so he switched his majors to criminology. And during his time at DeSales, he studied under Kathleen Ramsland, like you talked about, Jason, who was a famous criminologist who literally wrote the book on BTK, studied the serial killer, spent time with him, reading his letters and corresponding and learning his cipher code and getting in the head of a killer. And so there was some early indications that Koberger was obsessed with Kathleen Ramsland and becoming proving that he was a worthy killer, if you will. But setting that aside, because I want to focus on on the whole he's a Fed or whatever aspect. Here's where the logic goes, in my opinion. So Koberger was a top student in criminology. The professor that recommended him, which I don't believe was Catherine Ramsland, actually, was a different professor, recommended Brian Koberger to the PhD candidate class in WSU, and was only one of two students that she's ever basically acknowledged as worthy of being a PhD candidate. She thought of Koberger as a special person, and thought he showed top-notch aptitude. So then comes, and I know this is long-winded, but I just want to lay out some of my logic when we get to the he's a Fed. Then comes a federal grant to WSU to study crimes in an off-campus situation in WSU, and a big amount of money went to WSU just before Koberger went to WSU. So the question becomes, in some people's minds, did Koberger, and by the way, Koberger also allegedly in books talked to his dad and said, "Look, I'm not going into criminology to be a cop. I want to be a big deal. I want to be a profiler. I want to work for the feds." That was kind of like his what he stated. Like, I want to work for the feds,
Wow.
right? So then he takes a PhD candidate class at WSU with funding from NIJ, the National Institute of Justice, big money coming into WSU, and he goes there following the money, and he ends up on campus, right? So one side of the scenario says Koberger all along has been a Fed. They had his eyes on him in college, just like they watch a lot of top students. And this guy is sharp. He's an up and coming hot dog where we want to use him somehow. So they have his eyes on him. Now he goes to WSU. One scenario is from the very beginning, he was a Fed. And so that he's involved in this from the very beginning. Or the other scenario goes, murders happen, just like we're talking about, under the watchful eye of a confidential informant protection service, and they fuck up and they let the kids get killed, and then they start going, "Oh my God, how do we get out of this? We just screwed up. We lost a CI. Hey, you know what? We've got this bright PhD candidate who we've been watching for a while. He's top dog. If he really wants to be a Fed, how about we go to him with an offer? You want to be a Fed? Do us a favor. Take the fall for this. We'll put you on the inside in the prison as this big, horrible monster, and then you can work for us. You've always wanted to work for us. Why don't you do this? Take the fall. We'll put you inside in the prison. You'll work for us." And that's a scenario that almost seems plausible to me. Not necessarily likely, but it seems plausible. What do you think?
I agree. Well, it could be plausible, but then you'd have to. It's brilliant, DA, devil's advocates, but you got to go back. I think it doesn't explain to me why we didn't see any body bags. Why we didn't see, as you fully well know, we didn't see any raw crime scene footage of the actual so-called atrocity. All these YouTubers, oh, the atrocity happened, right? Jay Embry, it's atrocity, atrocity, atrocity. And he doesn't want to go into, and a lot of these YouTubers leave, but you do, but others don't. A lot of them, they don't spec. Wait a sec. Why didn't they treat that like a real health hazard at times? As I've told you before,
Yeah,
right? They didn't
right.
wear masks at times, the forensic investigators. Sometimes they did, but other times they didn't. And the foot slippers, that would have been an absolute health hazard if, in fact, 4 students were unalived, stabbed to death. It doesn't explain that second scenario, Lee. Why was there blood on the foundation of the house? And I'm sure you and Bertie have talked about it in no uncertain terms, on the foundation of the house for so long. Was it weeks that blood on the foundation? They would have erased that, man. That's a health hazard.
Yeah.
But if it's staged, you'd have blood, because that confused me for the first year, DA. I was convinced, oh my God, it must be like what we're told. 4 students were stabbed to death. It's right in front of our eyes. It's red, red on the foundation of the house. It's got to be blood. This highly charged emotional narrative. But then you take a step back and you start connecting the dots. Well, wait a second. That can't be right. If it was a real health hazard, they would have got rid of that blood right away on the foundation house within 24, 48 hours. You know this, forensic investigators. They got to do that. But they didn't do that in this case. And mainstream media, as you know, they have all the resources to get leaked crime scene footage of real high-profile crimes. It almost always happens these days. And it didn't happen in this case, right? And the sealed records, and on we'll go. And I'll ask some of those hard questions at the end of this video, and give the audience an answer, what I think is the real answer to this.
Yeah, and kind of what you're saying, a little bit can tie into the drug angle, but then is also part of the whole, is it a staged event? Even if it's a staged event, how does it relate to the drug angle? I want to point out a couple more things about the drug angle before I move on to another type of theory, because I was spending longer on the drug thing than I wanted to, but there's other things we haven't even mentioned. For example, some have indicated, for example, there's been rumors, and I don't know that it had a lot of teeth, to be fair. So I want to ask you if you've heard the rumor and whether you think it had teeth, that one of the girls had flushed a large amount of drugs that was inside the house down the toilet, and that they found out about it. And that was part of the whole Showalter telling, Maddie at the grub truck, they're going to get you for that, that she had actually flushed a bunch of drugs, and it could have been on the order of $250,000 of drugs or whatever that she just flushed, and somebody's going to want payback for that. Did you hear any of those kind of rumors? Did you think it had teeth to it, or what do you think about that?
Yes, I think that could very well have teeth to it. I think it's difficult unless you're on the inside of knowing these kids, and hanging out with them in those circles. I think it's hard to otherwise to prove that that happened, but I think it very well could have. That could be reason why they were targeted. Absolutely. But another thing though that, and I was going to say this near the end of the video, but why did Kaylee photobomb her mom the day before? I had a mother DA tell me she has kids roughly the same age as Kaylee. She said, I've never had my daughter photobomb me or any of my daughters. So was that part of the pre-planning? Did these girls and Ethan potentially, did they know the feds were watching and they were something was pre-planned, they were going to get extracted, get them the hell out of there? Because to your point, maybe drugs were flushed. Maybe even that night things were amping up, right? And the U.S. Marshals they knew they had to get them out of there. So,
So let
I
me
think
let me let me
those are interesting.
another couple of wild, crazy drug angles. Another wild, crazy drug angle. One of the reasons some people thought, why the 8-hour delay for the 911 call was partly because
Yes,
Dylan or Bethany were trying to cover up drugs. That there was a large amount of drugs in the house. They were afraid that in the investigation of the murder scene, all the drugs would get discovered, and so the girls were more, or I should say, less about covering up the murder as they were trying to get all the drugs out of the house as quickly as possible before they call 911 and they all get busted for a crap ton of drugs in the house. What are your thoughts about that?
I haven't thought about that too often. A few times I have, DA, and that's interesting. I'm glad you brought that up. I think that's very possible in one way. Absolutely, there's probably a lot of drugs very well could have been in that house, but it still doesn't explain, does it? Why would any killer or killers? Let's just say it's gangbangers and not Brian Coburn, because you and I think we've already alluded to it. Brian Coburn had nothing to do with so-called atrocity happening. We could talk more about that. But why would cartel gangbangers or, you know, uh, gangbangers, or I already said that, or cartel members, why would they leave 2 roommates alive and yet you're going to take out the other 4? That makes absolutely no sense. No sense,
So
in
what
my opinion.
about, let me talk about another crazy angle, which is that there was a known, in my investigation, there was a known drug task force operating in Moscow that had multiple agencies that were a drug task force. They knew that drugs were running through Moscow, running through the campus at Idaho. And of course, this is, in my opinion, this is a thing that you don't want getting out into national media, because who wants to send their kids to a university where drugs are out of control and you're literally a hub for shipping drugs in and out of the city, right? So
That's
the
right.
city, of course, has a vested interest to keep it a hush hush. The government's working and this part is true, that the government did have a multi-jurisdictional task force against drugs in the area. Now, here's where it gets crazy. I know people think this might be a little out there, but I think it's not outside the realm of possibility that you get corrupt cops who are involved in watching drugs, who are skimming money off the top. Drug cartels or drug industries pay off some cops that are a little bit, maybe a little unethical, to basically look the other way so they can run their drugs through the town. So if there were cops involved, then again, you have a scenario where if this is a drug hit, drug retaliation, and there's a lot of drugs involved, and Moscow Police Department has an officer or two who's involved in those drugs thing and looking the other way, they don't want their hands anywhere near admitting and having it come out in public that the MPD themselves have officers involved in the drug trade and should dipping their hands into shit that they shouldn't do. So would they then be inclined to cover up their mistake, to say, shit, we've got to make sure MPDs know we're involved with this thing because we're actually running those drugs through the house and stuff like that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. But that doesn't explain why Dylan and Bethany, right, were left alive, right?
Right. I mean,
Untouched.
you'd have to work through those scenarios about whether or not the officers, well, again, if Dylan worked with police officers that were corrupt and on the take or whatever, did they protect her by saying, "Hey, look, well, you just say the right things, do the right things, and we'll cover you, and we'll make it look like you're the innocent lamb," kind of thing. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to get too wild with it, but I'm just kind of as I'm going through, I'm just kind of asking you to ponder all these scenarios, and the drugs has been a major one. And one of the last things I want to touch on the drug angle is this idea, and it's now it's not so much the drug trafficking hit thing, but it's this angle. Brian Koberger has a history with drugs. When he was in high school, he did heroin. Now, I have argued right off the very beginning. I remember Pavarotti, for example, would be one of the major channels saying this is a drug thing. Koberger was using, he was buying drugs. Those girls sold drugs out of the house. He went there to that house to buy drugs. This is all a drug thing gone bad because Koberger was an addict. I've never bought that theory, although I know a lot of people tell me I'm wrong. Koberger was into drugs. He was buying drugs. That was what was happening at the house. I maybe I'm naive, but I think that the type of, Pavarotti's big thing was meth. It's all meth. It's meth. And I'm like, I don't think Koberger was a meth addict and a top PhD candidate. I just don't see the two congruent with each other personally. But then there's the idea of Emma Bailey and Demetrius, known quote unquote drug dealers who lived nearby in the neighborhood. Was Koberger going to actually Emily and Demetrius's house for a drug deal? And that's why his car was in the neighborhood, and he wasn't even there for that. He just happened to get tangled into it because his car was in the area buying drugs that night. So I guess the last thing I want to do on the drug angle is give me your thoughts. Is Brian Koberger, in your opinion, just a junkie who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, was either buying drugs out of that house or from the neighbors nearby, and got fingered for it because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time and he really was just into drugs?
I'm glad you asked me that. I used to think that Brian Kohlberger, based on some of the pictures, was a drug addict, but now I'm starting to think, knowing that the feds are so shrewd, organized, right? And some of them are evil, but there's a lot of good feds out there too. But I think it was all scripted again, DA, devil's advocates. I think all the pictures are curated. I think that he deliberately they had him lose weight because he's an actor. He's on a script, and in this case, it was pre-planned for a while. This is what's going to happen. We're gonna do a fake unaliving. You're going to be the patsy. We're going to put out this convenient narrative. You happen to be from Washington State. We can't have somebody arrested and be an actor in Moscow, Idaho. So you're going to be conveniently next door. I don't think he was a hardcore drug addict. I mean, he could have been, but I think it's just all part of the script, the acting, personally. I mean, anybody could lose weight, be in a sauna. He was already a lean guy, right? And sure, at times he looked emaciated, but if you're an actor and you're getting paid as a confidential informant, working with the feds, what have you, you could pull this off, and curated photos. And I think that's what we saw. And he looked healthy, of course, in court. But then again, you could say, well, he's off the drugs. He's in jail now. And Pavarotti, you got to be careful with him. In my opinion, the fact that he keeps saying atrocity, never goes into the stage crime scene, the evidence for that. He could be a misinformation agent on YouTube. There's a lot of them out there. I'm not saying he is, but we got to ask the hard questions. So don't just dive highly emotionally charged with every YouTuber that's out there. There's a lot of great ones like yourself, Devil's Advocates, but there's a lot of others that I believe deliberately put out misinformation. And he won't do interviews. You brought him up, right? I'm sorry I'm going on a rant here, but the people that won't do interviews, you got to ask sometimes why. I mean, I challenged him, do an interview with me, man. But they don't want the hard questions asked, and they'll lose a lot of subscribers, in my opinion, or they would be doing interviews. Anyway, sorry, I got off the tangent.
No, it's good. And I'm not really going to weigh in on Pavarotti's stance, but yeah, I do know he doesn't do any lives. He doesn't really do any, any stuff like that. And so, I mean, to your point, is there a fear factor? I don't know. He's pretty good at his research, but he tends to be, he's one trick pony in the sense that he's got one theory and he sticks to that theory and that's it, kind of thing. And whereas I'm kind of like, well,
and there's no proof.
Yeah,
exactly. Sorry, Devil's Advocate. There's no proof. His audience has to understand, even if they're caught up in this emotional psyop, following this guy. And I used to follow him too. I used to believe in what he was saying. But then you connect the dots. Well, wait a second. Show me the evidence that the atrocity took place. Show me your evidence, Pavarotti, that there was really an atrocity. Where's the leaked crime scene footage? Did they treat it like a real crime scene hazard the whole time, Pavarotti? The answer is no. Why did they have American relocation on the boxes, Pavarotti? I would ask him those questions and have that conversation if he had the courage, DA. Why was the parent company, as you know, called Sirva, Sirva? Why is that important? Because Sirva works with the feds at times. This is a huge federal operation, folks. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and I know you're excited about. I mean, I keep trying to put aside the "it didn't happen" angle for a little bit longer. But I realize. I mean, you're kind of like you're big on that, and it's not a big deal. But let me bridge. I'm going to bridge the gap a little bit from drugs into another theory. I'm going to bridge it using an individual by the name of Brent Kopacka.
Cool.
So Brent Kopacka was one of my early suspects in this case, for many reasons. One of which, Brent Kopacka, his family comes from Pennsylvania, same place that Koberger's family comes from. There's a lot of circumstantial evidence that these guys knew each other from Pennsylvania and then ended up within 2 miles of each other in Pullman, Washington. And I said to a friend, and I say it to this day, if those two guys lived anywhere near each other in Pennsylvania and then ended up in Podunk, fucking Pullman, Washington, within 2 miles of each other, that's not a coincidence. You cannot convince me that's a coincidence. Now, let me pull this thread a little bit further. So Brent Kopacka was an Army Ranger, and yes, he was much older than Brian Koberger, but Brent Kopacka and his friends were all into horror films. Koberger's sister, Amanda Koberger, starred in a horror film. Did they all get to know each other from the horror film scene? Did Koberger know Kopacka? Was Kopacka interested in Koberger's sister because she was into horror films? It's not a horrible stretch to say that these people all knew each other in Pennsylvania and all came out from Pennsylvania. And in fact, getting way ahead of myself, Othram Labs ultimately would say, when they traced the DNA from the crime scene, they went to 4 brothers in Pennsylvania. Koberger doesn't have any brothers. Kopacka does have 3 brothers. There's 4 brothers total. And so I thought to myself, it's Kopacka. They found a guy in Pennsylvania that had brothers, and that was Kopacka. They want to cover that up because Kopacka, of course, was shot and killed 1 month after the murders in Idaho. Now, let me finish the thread bridging these two.
Supposedly.
Yeah, go ahead. Supposedly, which part?
No, just supposedly. We have no proof that he was actually. I don't think we have any proof that he could have been extracted out the back door as well, possibly, in my opinion.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, let's put that aside for a moment. So let me just finish the bridge. So there's an argument that says these guys knew each other, and in fact, these guys may have done drugs with each other at some point in the past, back when Koberger was into drugs in Pennsylvania. Koberger was known to want to be an Army Ranger. Kopacka was an Army Ranger. Did he idolize Kopacka? Kopacka got a Purple Heart, came back and had PTSD and all kinds of issues. Did they end up in Pullman, Washington? Were they friends still? And then there's this argument. Kopacka and Koberger became enforcers for the drug industry. Koberger slimmed down, took boxing classes, made his body a temple, became more elite, and wanted to get into fighting and stuff like that. Perhaps emulating Kopacka, who was himself fit fighter, trained in knife fighting. Oddly enough, knife fighting. Did these guys turn somehow into enforcers for the drug industry? And did they, through Koberger, come out to Pullman, Washington? And Koberger is working with the feds now, and he's like, look, we are inside guys. We can get inside the drug community. We know the drug community. We've been in the drug community, and we've run enforcement for the drug community. So we can work with you feds, and we can get into the drug, and maybe they got moved. There's a scenario. Maybe they got moved to Pullman, Washington to help out with the multi-jurisdictional drug issue going on in Pullman by taking a top dog guy, people who had been involved in the drug trade as enforcers, and brought them out to Pullman to basically try to interact with this whole situation somehow, and it went south.
That's interesting. I don't think you have to go there, though. I think that those two were confidential informants for the feds. I think Brent Kopacka, they deliberately probably wrote Brent Kopacka as friends or maybe as a protector for Brian Koberger or vice versa. We really don't know. But I do think they most likely, I agree with you, that they knew each other. But I don't think I can't see any evidence. I don't think they would ever be directly involved with gangbangers as part of a gang organization, or cartels. I don't see that. They may have been in the circles of those, but I think through and through, I think those two, especially Brian Koberger, was a federal asset. He was an intelligence asset. He was the actor in all this.
So
Does that make any
Let me
sense?
finish. It does. It does. Let me finish the thought about
Okay.
my thought about Brent Kopaka. And I realize I feel bad because there's two names in this case with Idaho 4 that everybody, no, there's three names in this case that everybody loses their mind when I mention it. Brent Kopaka is one of them. Oh my God, DA, leave Brent Kopaka alone. He had fucking nothing to do with it. You're being an asshole. He's a soldier. He's got a Purple Heart. You're disrespectful. Guy had nothing to do with it. I'm sorry. I'm going to call it like it is. That guy was trained in knife fighting, had PTSD, and someone like him had the skills to kill 4 people in 8 minutes with a knife. And the wounds that were inflicted
Maybe.
was somebody who is somebody that would know how to do that. Now, again, that's under the assumption that the kids really died. I could see somebody trained like him that has the ability to do something like that. So it's always been on my radar. And I thought his death was suspicious. His phone was factory wiped after he was killed by the police. I find that fucking suspicious. The whole thing about every part of Kopaka's story rings suspicious to me. And yet people kick me in the balls if I mention Kopaka. Be respectful. That guy's a soldier. Cut him a slack and leave his freaking family alone. Same thing if I mention Jack DeCoeur. We'll save that for later. Same thing if I mention Dylan. We'll save that for later. But the Kopaka thing has always been a major problem for me in this case. To this day,
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a scenario in which Brian Koberger and Kopaka knew each other, and Koberger may have driven Kopaka to the house, and Kopaka actually did the killing. And literally, Koberger could have been nothing more than the getaway driver. And maybe he was there, and maybe he was involved, but Kopaka is the one that had the skills to do something like that if it happened in the time frame that they said it did. I think that somebody like Kopaka would have had the skills to do it.
I think that's really interesting. Again, fascinating. I think Kopaka. I think it's very likely he was involved in drugs and with other drug, some gang bangers, most likely. If he had a drug, it's sad, right, that he had a drug, probably an addict. He had PTSD. I don't know if he was a drug addict for sure, but he was on something. Apparently, when he was interviewed, you could tell he was out of his mind, starting to lose it, apparently, paranoid. So there's a lot there to sink your teeth into, but we don't have a whole lot of evidence, mind you. So yeah, I could see why, DA, that you're kind of obsessing about Brent Kopaka's role in all this. And I agree with you. You're not disrespecting the family. You're speculating. You give honor where it's due, that he served in the military. You're stating as fact. We obviously respect that, those of us that have morals. And you're not doing any injustice by saying that he served in the military. He has PTSD, or did. But I don't even think, again, he could have been extracted, not even really unalived, as we're told, and
So
killed. You got to remember, my friends, it's called extraction removal operations. Yes.
Yeah. Well, let me finish. Again, we will get into the witness protection extraction element even more in a little bit. But let me finish one more thought too with the Kopaka thing is, again, if Kopaka and Koberger both were somehow involved with the feds, involved in the drug industry in that area, trying to either crack down on it through their multi-jurisdictional task force or whatever, and if something went south, and Koberger got killed and he was one of their assets, I could see how they'd be like, we want to cover this whole thing up, that he was one of our assets, that things went south, we got to cover it up. And who's he working with? Koberger. They both came out together as a package deal. So then you just turn on the guy who's left. So there's always that element to me that says the feds fucked up. Kopaka was in with them. Something went wrong, either due to his PTSD, he lost it, and they were like, shit, he's one of ours, and we can't admit that he was working for us and did something horrible. So we're just going to find somebody and throw him under the bus. And Koberger is the obvious choice because they both came out from Pennsylvania. And again, I can't get over the fact that Othram Labs found DNA profile that hit 2 people in Pennsylvania, and both these guys came from Pennsylvania. Was the hit really Koberger, or was it Kopaka's line that they got? And I think it very likely was Kopaka's line they got. And now it's all just, the narrative has shifted to Koberger because they don't want anybody to know Kopaka was originally involved in this deal. It just made it neat and tidy to shift it all to another Pennsylvania guy, Koberger, and put it to bed, and everybody feels good. And I know that sounds really, really crazy, but I just wanted to share that. That's some of my thoughts still, to me, it still nags at me that there's part of that I can't put away that I think could have possibly happened. But at the end of the day, we'll never know, because I don't think they're ever going to pull the thread on that and expose that, nor could they, I don't think, at this point. But so
No.
Let's shift gears before we get into the extraction thing kind of towards the end, but let's shift gears to talk about another theory that was out there, the frats. There's been a lot of talk that the fraternities in the area had fight clubs that they would frequently get together and they would have fights that were televised and people would watch on their phones, right, and that Ethan had gotten his
Yes.
ass kicked that night, and Xana lost her mind, and then Xana got caught up in it and she got killed and all this with that. What are your thoughts about all the various theories that you may have heard about the frats and the fight club and all that stuff?
I think there very well may have been a fight club, DA. I would be surprised actually if there wasn't some sort of fight club in good old Moscow, Idaho. These small towns are, again, showing they're fascinating. There's a lot of corruption, unfortunately, and also good people in these small towns. Of course, I'm not discounting that, but I don't think many people could beat up Ethan Chapman unless he was going against somebody that's really knows how to fight. He was a big boy. He was a handsome dude. I'll never believe personally that he was unalived in this case, and we'll get into that more at the end of the video, hopefully. But as to why I think he was not unalived, as they say. But yeah, I do think there was a fight club. I think the people on the phones at the grub truck, DA, I think they were probably looking at a fight club. I think that's very, very likely. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I at first I dismissed the idea, but then I started to watch what did look like odd behavior where people were whipping out their phones and it seemed like they were watching some kind of thing together collectively. And I thought, wow, there's something to there. I know there was a lot of people were saying that there was mysterious transactions that were happening where people were paying $6 to watch something. So the question was, what were they paying for?
Yes.
The only problem that I
Yes.
had was it later on came out through police documents and stuff like that, that there literally was like a UFC fight or something like that night, and that somebody may have
Mm.
been re-streaming the UFC fight, and that might have been the fights that they're watching, not some two random college kids in a hotel room or a basement somewhere, but literally might have been watching the UFC fights that they were basically hijacking and paying a small spiff to have it re-streamed to them on their phones. So I don't know. I really don't know, but I do feel
Huh.
like for me, the frats were always not the real story here, but I know that a lot of people to this day, a lot of people to this day think it's the frats. And by the way, just as a follow-on, I don't know if you heard, but just recently, the frats in Moscow, Idaho were involved again with curb stomping a kid, putting him into a medically induced coma, fighting for his life because they thought he was gay or something like that, and they curb stomped him and beat the hell out of him. And so the frats are just out of control there. And again, and Moscow Police Department is not basically placing anybody under arrest. Last I heard on the whole thing, and it's just what the hell's going on with the frats in Moscow, Idaho? So could it be? Sure, but it just always felt to me that it wasn't really what happened. It wasn't about the frats myself, but
I agree. No, I agree because I don't even think there was an atrocity. We'll get into
yeah,
that later. But yeah,
yeah.
no,
So
I think the frats is a distraction.
and I think we can move
Sorry, go
pretty
ahead.
closely there. I'm gonna cover the Jack DeCour angle, and then we'll get into the
Cool.
your theory at the end, which is that it's an extraction didn't happen in the first place, whatever kind of thing. So let's talk about Jack DeCour for a minute. Another individual, I tell you that every time I mention Jack DeCour's name, I get kicked in the teeth. One thing I can say about Jack DeCour is almost everybody who's met the man thinks that he's the most wonderful person in the face of the planet and can't believe that people would accuse him of something so horrible. So there's that. Lots and lots of people come to his defense. Now, I will say this: Steve Gonzalez originally himself questioned Jack DeCour. According to uh, you know, Howard Bloom's book, When the Night Comes Falling, Steve Gonzalez made Jack DeCour immediately roll up his shirts and take his shirt off and show him to make sure he didn't have any wounds on his body because he believed Jack DeCour had something to do with his daughter's death. That relationship had just recently ended. He was a jealous ex-boyfriend. Many people said he was having mental health problems. He had seen a mental health counselor. He was not dealing with the relationship well, even though the narrative, and that's what bothers me the most about the Jack DeCour angle, the narrative out there is he was perfectly fine with it. They were best friends. They stayed close. He had no problem with the fact that Kaylee was moving on and sleeping with other guys and had other boyfriends, and he was cool with it. And I say horseshit. I say horseshit. He was cool with it. I think he was struggling with it emotionally. I think if he was staying close to Kaylee, it's because he was hoping to win her back. That if he just stayed in the wings as the guy that understands and she'll get over it and she'll come back to him. I think that's a thing that a lot of guys play as their move. I'm just going to stay close and be friendly and hope that she works this out of her system and I'll still have her. I think that was the case, and I don't think he was dealing well with it. So I think in any kind of murder, the number one person you look for is the spouse or the significant other. There was early indications, and I won't get into all the details here, that Kaylee was the target of the house. She received different wounds, more significant than anyone else. Was the early indications that Kaylee was, and in fact, law enforcement gave several tips where they felt that Kaylee was the target in the house, and they said it was a targeted attack, and that Kaylee they didn't say Kaylee, but I believe Kaylee was the one they thought was targeted, and that leads me to the Jack DeCour. And there's a million reasons to think Jack DeCour was not handling the fact that Kaylee was about to graduate, leave to Texas, take their dog with him, and never return. And it was one of those scenarios of, if I can't have you, no one else can. Whether or not Jack went into the house, or whether or not friends of his did it for him, whatever the case may be, it's never been something I can completely put to bed. What are your thoughts on the Jack DeCour? How do you sit on it?
Well, I think excellent question again, DA. I think it's part of this fascinating case, right? You've got, what, 3 or 4 Jacks possibly involved in some way of the crime in one way or another. If you believe an actual crime took place, which we've been fed on mainstream media, we're supposed to believe, again, if you believe Steve G, like you said, that Kaylee, he got Jack to roll up his sleeves and he stabbed Kaylee, but I think that's all part by design, in my opinion, of this emotionally high-charged narrative. I think Steve G probably signed a non-disclosure with the feds to release a certain amount of information. Don't blow the case wide open. And remember, DA, we could talk about this more at the end of the video. Christy G, I think, gave away the whole thing in an interview. And most YouTubers, including Pazzarotti, won't play it. She said, Maddie just bought a new house, as in house. We know what word she was going to finish. And she took off out of the interview. But back to Jack DeCour. I think you're right. Jack probably did very much struggle, as most young men would, 99% of them, when your beautiful girlfriend is going to move away, potentially get a new boyfriend, new love interest, potentially, take your dog. But I think they had great communication at the same time. And I think Jack was dealing with it probably the best he could. They did talk at the grub truck, if those videos are to be believed, which I guess they are, right? They did talk that night briefly, or just before the grub truck, was it? So
for sure,
I don't think anything.
For sure, at the bar, he was there, but
okay,
the grub truck was under debate. But yeah,
cool. So, but I think Jack there's no evidence to show that he was a villain. We're speculating that if an atrocity happened, that he would be a prime suspect because of, as you said, the number one suspect is usually the love interest, whether it be a boyfriend or a husband, somebody that's close to the victim.
Yeah.
But we're going to go to why I don't think there was any victims in this case. Hold your breath, everybody.
Yeah, I'm trying to, off the top of my head, think of what other ones I might need to, because maybe it's time to do this. So, because I know that I wanted to cover the drug. We covered drugs. We covered that quite heavily, about different theories about the drugs. The ex-boyfriend, Jack DeCour, has been a major one of mine. We covered that quite a bit. We covered Kopaka a little bit, and I think those are big. So, and we covered the frats, which is another big one. And again, out of all the cases, I think even you said this, maybe it was you, said early on, I've never seen a case with so many different alternate theories. Maybe it wasn't you, maybe it was somebody else, but this case has had an insane amount of things. And by the way, one more thing, now that it's over, people like Pavarotti are coming out with brand new actors, never heard of him before. Now Malwich is the one that did it, or so-and-so's. And it's like, there's names we haven't even heard at all for 2.5 years. And now all of a sudden, here's the killer, and it's this brand new person. You've never heard of it. I'm like, and I literally, I'm starting to check out. I can't handle another theory. There's already, I've got a video with like 27 different theories in this case, all of which have a little bit of meat on it. It's ridiculous at this point. I can't do another theory on Idaho 4. So, but before we get to where I think is most plausible, let's now basically give you the stage. Pitch me your best case, all the scenarios you can think of, on why this either didn't happen, was a witness extraction, Koberger is a Fed and he's in, or the girls are in witness protection. Lay that out for us. Tell me what you think.
Well, I think the questions are, DA, that people have to ask again, and I'll give you the answer. Why was there no body banks seen? Why was there, by the way, why was there no open public casket ceremony? People will say, well, Jason, all 3 were cremated, right? And DA, yes, supposedly. And Ethan had a private funeral service. But when we go into the extraction operation in a few minutes, Remember, folks, you will never have an open public casket ceremony if, in fact, this whole thing was staged, if this whole thing was a psyop. Why was, again, no leaked raw crime scene footage, man? Nobody saw the victims. Students would be taking pictures during the 911 call. Students probably would have been taking photos of those victims, you would think. Again, mainstream media, they would have got something, folks, and or autopsy photos. Look at O.J. Simpson, right? And I was predicting, as Bertie was, DA, that I don't know what you thought, that I thought if there was a trial, the coroner probably wouldn't even show. It would be too difficult to cover all that up. And they would find some way where that coroner wouldn't show. Unlike, again, an OJ trial where the coroner did show. And so many more questions. Why were two roommates left alive? Passerati can't even really, I don't think, defend that properly. Why? If you're gangbangers, like Passerati and others have said that did this hit, DA, or cartel members, why would you leave Dylan and Bethany alive? And don't tell me it's because, like Passerati's sort of alluded to, well, they were close to the, I think he said, to the gangbangers or something, and they intimidated them not to call 911 for 8 hours. That makes no sense. Absolutely no sense. You'd have to take out every single person in that house if you were gangbangers doing a hit. Passerati knows it. I know it. He won't admit it. And that sort of infuriates me. And there's many, many more questions. Again, North American Relocation Services on the boxes, very odd. Why did they have the Serva, the parent company, who works with the feds? They do regular moves and move fridges out and stuff, they tell you. But they also have that Schedule 48 in which they will protect confidential informants. They will move government officials, right? I think the people that do say a confidential informant was involved in this case, I think it's true. I think a confidential informant most likely was compromised. And the reason is the feds can stage a violent event if a confidential informant's been compromised. They can legally do all this, folks, and they can actually delete you. They can stage your unaliving, and they can actually, I hate to say it, but they can actually unalive somebody at times. And it's almost like accepted casualties, as our good friend Ellie said, my good friend, and she's been interviewed with us, Devil's Advocates. I want to give her a shout out from Ellie's Place on Facebook. But am I going on a tangent too much here?
No, I
Are we
think
good?
I think what I'd like to know is if you can you explain to people who was the confidential informant and what were they informing on and why are they being protected? In this scenario that it's a confidential informant that's being protected, what were they going to inform on? What are they being protected about? And what's the, explain that to everybody so they can understand in plain English what they were involved in.
I think part of that speculation, DA, is what you said earlier. There was probably at least one or two drug parallel investigations. We know that for sure. So many drug busts afterwards, right after this crime almost, right? A month or so in Washington State. Was it 23 or 28 gangbangers arrested? So most likely a confidential informant was involved in the drugs in some way and working with the feds, helping with drug investigations. Yes, cops were probably skimming, as you probably said that earlier. That happens as well. It's all done very covert. And you know what's even more covert is if there's an extraction removal operation. That, my friends, is where it's really compartmentalized. Very few people are read into those programs. I studied the aerospace companies. I know somehow the secrecy works. And if you even divulge the existence of that program, like an extraction removal operation, for example, if that took place, which I believe it did, of those beautiful students, you can't even divulge the existence of the program you were working on, or you will be jailed 30 years or killed. That's how compartmentalized some of these programs are. And yes, the drug running is very covert as well,
The biggest thing I think is hard for people to swallow, and I'm just playing devil's advocates because, well, that's the name of my channel.
Sure.
But the biggest thing that is hard for people to swallow, I think, is, okay, well, then are you suggesting if somebody was a confidential informant and they didn't really die and they're just kind of whisked away into secrecy, does the family not know that? Are we going to allow the families to weep and just go on with their lives like they've lost a loved one when damn well they're alive somewhere? Or do they all know and you believe that everyone's keeping their mouth shut, all the way down to all the families involved and everybody's just really good at, I mean, like, it's one of the both, it's one of the other. Either everyone's led to grieve something that never happened, and the horrific psychological impact of everybody thinking this horrible thing happened that didn't really happen. They're just going to let you think that and suffer all the emotional pain to cover up their confidential informant. Or the families do know, and they're taking a risk that no one's going to slip and say, "Hey, by the way, it didn't really happen. They're fine." Like, explain,
Yes.
the logics behind that.
I'm so glad you asked me that, DA. Of all your questions today, I enjoy that one the most. Because if you look at those interviews, Birdie's looked at them, you've looked at them, we've all seen it, those of us that are familiar with this case in a big way in research. To me, and again, we all grieve differently. That's been said a million times. We get it. But they didn't act even close to real grieving parents, in my opinion. They know that those students are alive. They've made a lot of money from it, particularly Steve G. Okay, folks? And a lot of people are angry at him, even the ones that think this atrocity happened, DA, because they say, why are you've collected, what, 150, 175,000 at least on the back of your daughter's death? Are you kidding me? He's got houses, right? He's been married. He's been able to bring up kids. He's got a good job with the IT. And you're making all this additional money on the back of your daughter's death? What if he knows that she's alive? And guess what, DA, as I said earlier, there was somebody that did make a mistake, Christy G, in my opinion. She blurted out by an accident, in my opinion. She said, Maddie just bought a new house, as in house. Ellie knows it too. So you can't really justify that. I heard on Birdie's channel, people did try to justify why she may have said that. It makes no sense still. She, I believe, did that by an accident. So if you're in protection witness, like WITSEC program, we'll get into that, the Witness Federal Security Program in the United States, apparently you can buy a house and you can be extracted in another country, folks. I know it sounds wild, but I believe all 4 students, or at least some of those students, are in places like Puerto Rico, where you have a WITSEC program, DA, from your amazing United States. And that's the real reality of this case. It's Steve G. He's supposed to act and to spare him and his wife, I believe, but sometimes they tell you too much. Steve G, does he ever cry in his interviews, folks? Can anyone tell me? Does he ever cry and break down? He's describing his daughter's nose being busted. Think about this psyop, psychological operations, my friends, because that's all it is, in my opinion. Highly emotionally charged narrative that he's supposed to give. Wouldn't you break down as a father if you have any sympathy and you really love your daughter? And I think he did. I think he was a good father by all accounts overall with Kaylee. But wouldn't you cry? Wouldn't you break down? You're describing your beautiful daughter's nose busted in the most horrific, brutal unaliving you can imagine. He didn't, because I think it's all acting. I think it's all lies, in my opinion,
So where does Koberger fit into the extraction format? He's a Fed as well, and is he not really in prison? Is he off somewhere, or soon to be off somewhere and out in
Soon
protected
to be
custody?
off somewhere. Absolutely, DA. Just like Ellie said, he's going to be out the back door, in my opinion, like an Epstein. Then you got YouTubers, rightly so, talking about what prison he might be in, or is he going to get brutalized? But they usually don't go, well, wait a second. What if he goes out the back door like an Epstein? He's probably a Fed. He was working for the Feds in some way. Come on, he was an actor in all this, a patsy, in my opinion. And the good news is, no, he didn't do any crime, because there was no crime. The students were extracted. You got to believe the U.S. Marshals, again, are the laziest people in the world, in my opinion, if you think that one or more students were killed because they had surveillance. They knew those students were targeted. They knew the parents probably were targeted at some point, potentially by gangbangers or cartels. So the next step is the Feds knew you got to put surveillance around the house to protect the kids. Steve G admitted it. They had surveillance around. So how could gangbangers, do one or more atrocities? I don't believe it could happen, folks. They had to get them out of there, and that's what extraction removal operations are for, right? Again, done very covertly in the cover of darkness. And I believe Kaylee knew it was coming, DA. Do you know why? Do you know why I think she knew it was coming?
Yeah. Why?
Do you know why? Because remember I said earlier, she photobombed her mom the day before. Now, So wouldn't that be a sign that she very well may knew they were going to be extracted very, very soon? She had to get all her photos to her mom. And why hasn't the mother received her phone? Apparently other electronics, maybe even her computer, they haven't received. I know they didn't receive her phone. Well, that's because, as Ellie said, it would blow the whole case wide open, right? If she was extracted, and if the feds get, or sorry, if Christie gets the phone, there's Christie could say too much or tell the wrong person. Boom, this case, the truth comes out. Otherwise, why wouldn't the mother get the phone back? That's my question on that. I thought about.
So so what do you think is going to happen with, in this scenario, the kids, all of them survived in this scenario? They're going to go somewhere else, right? Or they're going
Absolutely,
to live their lives outside the
absolutely,
country. We'll never hear from them again. What
absolutely,
what what keeps a
absolutely.
paparazzi from finding them on a beach somewhere and going, "Oh, hey, everybody, here's Kaylee. I just got a picture of her. She's on the beach." You know.
I would love that to happen, but no, because Pazzarotti, I don't even think Pazzarotti travels much. And I think he's, again, in my opinion, it seems like he very well may be some of them out there, a misinformation, disinformation campaign. Now, why do I say that? Because again, he's all about atrocity, 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 won't interview somebody like me, will probably never interview you, DA. He's only had one interview, and it was a half-ass interview with, a convict's thoughts. And all these people still believe an atrocity happened. There's no, and I would just simply say, Pavarotti, you got all these followers, you built this huge channel, you've done hundreds and hundreds of videos. That's why you got a big channel in part. You do hundreds and hundreds of videos. You put out a little bit of good information here and there, but you keep trying to convince us an atrocity happened when there's no concrete evidence that it did. What about the staged crime scene? Sure looked like a staged crime scene, didn't it, DA? To me, it
Well,
sure as hell did, and anybody could see it.
I
Yeah.
will give
Sorry?
you I will give you these points. I will give you these points for sure on the extraction thing. One, I don't know of anybody who's ever seen bodies coming out of the house. Like you said, they put up a tarp, they covered the whole thing so you couldn't see what was being brought out of the house. I've had one person, and the whole time that I've been doing this, had one person say, "Oh, I saw a video of the actual body bags, but I don't know where that video is at." So it's been a long time. That's it. Just somebody who said they saw it, but I've never seen it. I don't know anybody else other than this one person who's seen it. The fact that they tore down the house and completely demolished the house stunk to high heaven from the very beginning that they did that shit. I was like,
I
what
forgot
the
about
hell?
that.
Why the hell would you tear that house down? It makes no sense. What are you trying to, first thing you ask, what are you trying to cover up? You tore the house down. So the fact that you didn't see bodies, the fact that they won't release crime scene, there's this big thing now, we'll never show the bodies. We're never going to show the bodies. We're never going to show the autopsy stuff. We're never going to show anything. So nobody can see anything. That all reeks to high heaven of something that's being covered up. So to your point, yeah, you can see why somebody would definitely think it never happened because there's no proof that it really did happen. It's just a really good story, potentially with some really good actors, with no actual hard evidence that anything happened.
Exactly. And can I briefly? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, go ahead. Finish your thought.
No, I was going to ask you. Could I briefly describe a psyop? What I think this whole case represents. People say the word psyop, but they don't define it. Is that cool?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. A psyop is usually used in a political or military context in which you use communication and other non-combative means to influence, a targeted audience's emotions, behaviors, and attitudes. Ultimately, think about Steve G, in my opinion, and some of these actors in this. It's essentially about manipulating perceptions. Remember, I always said about that highly emotionally charged narrative that we heard through corporate media right from day one, right? The journalists, et cetera, the Nancy Graces, the Ashley Banfields. Are they manipulating our perceptions? In my opinion, it's yes, right? It's taking selected information and indicators to an audience to affect your emotions, your value systems at times, your belief systems, objective reasoning. The military, they often do psyops to assert confessions. The police, think in Moscow, Idaho, right? When they do an interrogation, especially, they will do a type of psyop normally, right? Where they're going to affect your value systems or objective reasoning to get maybe a confession, etc. It can be used to target individuals. It can be used to target certain groups, of course. It has different words. A psyop, you've heard of hearts and minds. Of course, psychological operations, information warfare, and propaganda. What do we see today in psyops, DA? How do they do it? Well, we know it's through normally social media, right? Back in your day, not that you're that old, but the 60s, the 70s, and earlier, it was through leaflets of propaganda, right? You know this. And during the Kennedy assassination, Oswald handing out leaflets of propaganda. So that was another way of conducting a type of psyop. There's three different types: tactical, operational, strategic. I believe this was like an operational strategic psyop. You mentioned all the drug running, right? That was a type of operational psyop with the drugs and the confidential informant being involved, and ultimately an extraction removal operation. That's the operational psyop that took place, I believe. They got those students, they protected them, which is the great news, and they're off in Puerto Rico probably. And we know Maddie just bought a new house, again, according to Christy G. Finally, my friends, a psyop, it can be used to induce cooperation, which is great, or it can be used to create division, which often we see, with the elites for profit, greed, and control. Unfortunately, they use psyops to divide people. So I think once we understand what a psyop is, we can really help change the world in a lot of ways, and we can understand the Idaho 4. Because was this a psyop from day one? I think in a large part it was. And the feds must have had the reasons. A confidential informant most likely was compromised, one of the 4 students, and all 4, for whatever reason, they had to get all 4 out that night, November 13th, 2022, or maybe even happened the day before, for all we know. Probably November 13th, We can't trust a lot of those audios, I believe, that, Pazzaretti's played and others. We got to be very careful because they could fudge a lot of that. Would you not agree, DA, by the way?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of isolated audios and resurfaced videos and playback at 10 times speed or 2 times speed, and I don't like playing those games. It's not to say that there isn't something there, but just if you've watched me for any time at all, you'll know I shy away with the huge long pole and keep my distance away from isolated audio videos, stuff like that, as proof of what happened. Too often it comes out that some YouTuber manipulated the sound to let you hear something, or they'll tell you what you're going to hear now is her saying this, and once you've been told what to hear, that's what your mind's going to hear. So I try to get my facts from other places other than, did you hear somebody say the word Xana in the distance on a muffled thing behind it? I can't go too far with it. Not to say that it's not true,
Cool.
but I just don't go that far. So,
Yes.
2 things. I wanted to kind of give my last take on what I think most likely happened from my view, not to say that your view or anybody else's view is wrong, because I think at the end of the day, anything's possible at this point with this case. It's absolutely crazy, including that it just happened the way that it said it happened. Koberger did it. He pled guilty. What are we even talking about? That's still a possibility. Whether I think that's logical, I don't know. That for me, unfortunately, that's one of the least logical things, is that he actually did it, and it's just, that's the end of the story after 2.5 years. But I realize that for the majority of Americans, that's exactly what happened. Why are you still talking about it? He pled guilty. It was always going to be true because they had his DNA at the scene. It's done. He pled guilty. Why are you still talking about it? It still doesn't sit right with me. So I'll give you my final thought. But you did say that you had some questions for me, so I'm trying to decide whether to end on my final thought or give you my final thought, and then we'll go into those questions you have for me. You still want to ask some questions of me, or no?
I do, but just before that, can I briefly mention USC Code 31 with you, DA?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. And I could have asked you this, but I'd like to also explain to the audience briefly what I know of USC Code 31. Thank you. I want to give credit, and I forget the guy's name, unfortunately. He was one of the very few people, probably it's just him and I and maybe Birdie, and hopefully yourself also, Dia. I know you're aware of it if you haven't mentioned it. And we talked about it with Ellie. But there was a YouTuber that mentioned it. He did it before I did. USC Code 31. Again, it allows the feds ultimately to do like fake unalivings, literally staging a violent event, folks. If a confidential informant has been compromised, they can stage a violent event. They can get that confidential informant out, whether it be one or more. Think about these students, in my opinion. They can extract them, remove them, protect them under WITSEC. It's USC Code 31 WITSEC, WITEC. DA knows full well what WITSEC is. Again, that Federal Witness Security Program in the United States, witness protection. They change your identities, relocate your names, etc. We won't see these students, if I'm correct. We won't get a digital transaction, digital trails of them, right? They're going to be protected. Their families may get, hopefully, some information at times from how their kids are doing. I think they probably will be read in to a certain level, if I'm correct. But that's what and they use national security, DA knows this, We've talked about it with Ellie before. And they have exemptions under the Patriot and prosecutorial discretion. We saw a whole show trial, I believe, DA, in this case. Would you agree that it was a show trial and that the defense was probably read in that these students are alive?
Well, I'll
That's
go
my
halfway
question
with
to you, sort of.
yeah, I'll go
Cool.
halfway
Cool.
with you. I think the trial was a joke. I think the trial was completely rigged. I think they knew what the outcome was going to be a long time ago. So I'll go with you on that. That was a
Cool.
show trial in the sense that that wasn't a real trial. Koberger had no chance of a real trial. That was never going to happen. They were never going to let this go to trial. Now, where I won't say is I won't go as far as to say I think the defense was read in and they all know that this didn't happen and it's all a big cover up. But I will go with you, like I said, that wasn't a fair trial. It never was a fair trial. They never intended it to go to trial. The government never intended to show their cards and talk about anything in front of a jury because either it didn't happen or it didn't. It's certain, more likely, in my opinion, it didn't happen the way they're saying it happened, and they didn't want to put that evidence in front of a jury. They also didn't, in my opinion, want to admit to a jury that they violated the Constitution of the United States in order to do some of the things that they did, and they didn't want that coming under scrutiny. So it was never going to go to trial because they didn't want to have to expose it. So this was always the inevitable conclusion, I feel, and that was a sham trial. But whether or not, like I said, whether or not the defense was in on it from the beginning or not, I don't know. So I'll give you my ending thought. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Yes. Oh no, just another question. I was dying to hear from you, DA, as to of all your thoughts, and I don't know, I'm sure they've evolved as the case has been going on. And I wonder if you believe, like I did, I believe corporate media, what we were being fed by the feds in the state that at first, for the first year, well, wait, that was blood on the foundation of the house. It must be blood from the students. What do you think now of that blood on the foundation of the house? I think it was pig's blood. I think it was all staged. Was that part of a staged crime scene? And if it wasn't, why do you think they let it on the foundation of the house all that time, DA? If I may ask.
Well, I mean, I don't want to take anything away.
You don't have to answer if you don't want.
Yeah, no, okay. I don't want to take anything away. I don't know that it was a big, huge biohazard that you made a comment of that wouldn't allow it because it was a huge I don't know if it was a big, huge biohazard. I think my gut told me that it was blood, but I will say this. The lack of blood at the crime scene based on the photos that we've seen perhaps speaks more than the blood that we saw on the outside of the house. The utter lack of blood inside the house makes me think, how do you have blood running down the walls and outside the house and not have that be a complete utter bloodbath inside the house? So I will tell you that the whole blood issue stinks to high heaven. I'm going to end on my thought for the moment, and then if you want to ask some more questions at the very, very end, we can do that as well. So here's my summation for those who want to hear it one more time from me. For those who watch my channel, you probably have noticed I was heavy on Idaho 4 for quite a long time. You may have also noticed that I hardly ever talk about Idaho 4 anymore. And yet Pavarotti comes out with a new video every single day, still talking about Idaho 4. And I keep getting told all the time, Pavarotti has solved this case. It's been solved. I said, and I'll counter a bit sarcastically, so who's going to jail for it then? Well, there's not going to be any That's right, because it's not solved. It's not solved because all we're at the end of the day is doing is we're just talking. It's never going to be solved because the solution is exactly what happened. Brian Koberger did it, and he's going to jail, and that is it. This story is over. Nobody else will be going to jail. And I sound like a little bit bitter apples, but for me, at the end of the day, the resolution is what the resolution is. We're not going to see somebody come and solve the case at this point, in my opinion. So let me tell you what I think happened. And here's what I think happened. I think, to be honest with you, I think Koberger was somehow involved in what happened that night. But whether he was the killer, whether he went into the house, and why he was there, that's the mystery to me. I personally put it as a possibility that it did happen the way that they say. It's possible. Brian Koberger went in. He was obsessed with serial killers. He was a little off. He wanted to see if he can get away with it. He's a PhD student. Maybe he wanted to prove that he was the master and had learned so much that he can get away with it. But I think that's highly unlikely. I think more than likely, he was a form of patsy, if you will. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time. He may not even have known what was exactly going to happen, but he realized at some point he was fucked. because the judge was never going to allow him to bring in alternative witnesses. He was never going to be able to explain anything else. Maybe one of the key people who were involved is dead now, Brent Kopacka, for example. So what are you going to do? You can't rat somebody who's dead. The guy's dead. So if you've got nobody else left to say, no, that's the guy that did it, but he's dead, they're never going to look into it. They're never going to test the crime scene for Kopacka's blood. Never going to happen. He knows his goose is cooked. And if he was even any way, shape, or form involved that night, even as a getaway driver, at some point you're like, well, I'm screwed. I'm done. Like I was there. I can't argue that I was there. The guy who did it is gone. So I'm just going to avoid getting executed. At least this way I can spend some sort of life. I can have some sort of life behind bars and I won't get executed. So there's in my likely scenario, Kohberger is probably complicit. I don't know how much he's complicit, whether or not he was involved inside the house or not. I don't know. But I think where I'm going with that is this. For me, there's some piece for me that if Kohberger was even remotely involved in it, then him going to jail for it might be okay because he was involved in it. And therefore, that's part of the price you pay for being involved in something like that. But at the end of the day, I'll finish on this thought. I still 100% believe that crime did not happen the way they told you it did. And the part that makes me the most frustrated about this case is as time goes by, and we know there's not going to be a case now, they keep adding new things that'll convince America that, oh, they already had his DNA all over the house. They already had all of these things were not true. It was fought in court. They admitted they didn't have his DNA. They admitted that they can't. Bill Thompson flat out said, we can't place Bryan Kohberger in the house. They never could place him in the house. To this day, he can't be placed in the house. And yet you watch 5 years from now, everybody's going to be convinced, oh yeah, Bryan Kohberger's DNA was all over the house. He was placed at the house. They knew he did it. No, they didn't. But yet the narrative will change and it'll drive me bonkers for the rest of my life, as people will say, well, we know what happened. He pled guilty. His DNA was all over the house. They placed him at the house. No, they didn't. They didn't have him placed at the house. So last thought to summarize. I think Kohberger was probably involved somehow. I just don't know how. It didn't happen the way they said it happened. But at the end of the day, I got to stop talking about it because I can't put any more mental energy towards one more theory on this case. I'm just so burnt with one more theory on this case that'll never be proven because we'll never
stick to my theory, DA. Stick to my theory. And I want to ask you, can you ever think about it, at least, to reach out to this Pavarotti J. Embry and ask him just to man up and let's do an interview with the two of us. He could do it individually, first you, first me, or whatever, vice versa. Hopefully all three of us could be on a panel and just man up and let's do an interview. Let's ask this Pavarotti, right, what he's been telling his audience. Oh, you keep saying this atrocity happened. I got some questions for you. What about the stage crime scene? Sure look like stage. What about USC Code 31 Witzik? You've talked about Witzik, Pavarotti, but here's the other part of the Witzik program you've never talked about, which I won't get into right now. Those are just some of the hard questions I would like to ask Pavarotti with you, DA, one day, and I'll do it respectfully. He knows this. I've told him. I'll be respectful. I'm not there to show this guy up, right, and to demean him. And but he turned me down. He did a whole video on me. By the way, I had a friend do a video. I was a baby. He dressed me as a baby, and he had this Pavarotti as a. Oh, good. I hope you laugh. And Pavarotti was a baby. Did you laugh? All right. And we were going back and forth. So good. So maybe, like, I'm a small channel. I haven't done a lot of videos. Ellie, though, has helped me build up a lot more subscribers. And you, DA, I want to thank you very, very much. You promoted my channel last time. I really appreciate that. I'm getting more subscribers over. I want to just, and people are educating me. I mean, I'm not Mr. Know-it-all in this case, not even close. I try to give credit to the people that I've learned from. I've learned a lot from you, DA, as well, in the Idaho 4. I hope to learn more from you in other cases. Maybe I could teach you a thing or two with other true crime cases out there that we may want to cover together. I'd be honored to do that, privileged. And but I would love for you to maybe think about reaching to Pavarotti, reaching out for him. And we could show, if he doesn't respond or doesn't say yes for an interview, we could show it to our audience or just tell the audience, this is his answer. For some reason, he does not want to do an interview. And you got a big channel and you're doing amazing work. He should want, in my opinion, to interview somebody like you and bounce your ideas off one another. In this Idaho 4, that, as you say, he continues to do videos. He continues to make money, even though he normally doesn't directly ask for money. but he's making money on the side with his members, etc. Yeah.
Well,
Thanks for
let
listening on
me
that,
address.
brother.
Yeah, no, and let me address that a little bit. First of all, for anybody who's interested in having me on their show as another YouTuber or whatever, I'm very, very open to going on people's shows and having people like yourself, on my show and or vice versa. So I'm open to that kind of stuff. Having said that, I definitely don't believe in ever, of course, trying to debate somebody online and try to make them look foolish on their position. And I know that's not what you're suggesting with Pavarotti, but my point being is this: one of the reasons why or how I view things a little differently, I guess, Jason, is that um, like with the drug angle, Pavarotti was on the drug angle from day one, right? And so in my mind, I thought to myself, one, he's way ahead of me. He's been covering the drug angle for a long time before I even jumped in the ring. So if the drug angle is right, if the drug angle is right, he is way ahead of me and is already 10 times further down the road than I am. For me to start and try to say, here's the drug angle when he's already been covering it, it would be foolish. Let him be the one to be the primary voice for the it's a drug angle thing, right? That's my view. I was like, do I have a different take? That's where I came. Do I have a different take? Yeah, I don't think it's the drug angle. I think it's probably the jilted boyfriend or whatever, the Kopaka. And so I focused on my wheelhouse. Now, that's not to say that I don't listen to Pavarotti's videos and go, well, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's a drug thing. I need to listen to what he's saying in the drug thing. But all the time people keep saying, DA, why don't you respond on it's the drug thing? Like Pavarotti's got it solved. It's the drug thing. I mean, he's been and again, I say the same thing every single time. If Pavarotti's got it solved, great. I have no problem if he's got it solved. But let that be his win. He's been on the drug thing for forever. I'm looking at it from a
Yeah.
different perspective. So I don't feel the need really to spend a lot of time going down a path that's well traveled. I'd rather say,
Sure.
do I have a unique take, and then I'll focus on my unique take, or at least something that I
Yes.
feel like I have. It may not be totally unique, but it might be something different. And so the drug angle just never really resonated with me. Is why I don't kind of cover it. And the ones that do resonate with me, those are the ones I beat the hell out of.
Thank you. Well, that's great. Well, what I also would like you to ask him, DA, if you ever did reach out on our behalf, is you could ask him in an interview, for example, with me, preferably there, but is to ask, well, um, Passerati, do you know about an extraction removal operation? Do you know what that is? And Jason, Estey's crime ace, he keeps saying that he believes it was an extraction removal operation. He's tried to connect the dots. And do you really believe everything that Steve G's coming out of his mouth? Are you telling your audience you believe Steve G when he says that his daughter's nose was busted and he's not, but Steve G's not even crying on what? And again, one more thing, Passerati, did you? Why haven't you played the interview with Christy G when she says Maddie just bought a new house, as in house? Come on, aren't they under the federal witness protection program, Passerati? Anyway, those are the questions I'd like to ask some of these YouTubers, not just Passerati, but others out there who have made a lot of money on this case, a lot of money at times, and yet they don't entertain, I think, the real possibility of an extraction removal operation. That the good news, those students are alive. The U.S. Marshals did their job and they protected them. They had surveillance all over the neighborhoods, all over the houses, undercover cops, as you know, DA, that night. We saw it on video, right? They're all over the place. And yet you're going to allow, by mistake, to cartel members, gang members, go in that house unscathed and stab people to death and leave two roommates alive? That makes no sense. I think it makes a lot more sense that they rescued those students and got them the hell out of town, huh, friends? It took me a
I
while
have
to get to that theory, but I firmly believe. Sorry,
I have to laugh.
go
You
ahead.
you rose to the level of a rant on you pulled a DA rant on that one. You started getting all shouty and shit, and and I'm like, oh yeah, you're going on a DA rant. I get it.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. Thank you.
So
Hell yeah.
as
No,
far
I
as
really
as far as
appreciate
I'm
the time today.
yeah, I think it was great. I think it's a good for me. I felt like it was a cathartic thing for us to just kind of review again one more time for me one more time all those theories out there in the air to kind of address the whole DA, why aren't you responding to Pavarotti's latest comment that it's Mowich that did it or so and so that did it, or I forget. There's even a new name after that now. It's like, and so I still get asked every day, why aren't you responding to this? And I guess at the end of the day, what I have to say is, for me, this case is starting to run its course. The trial will never happen. I was excited. I was excited to see the facts come out
Too.
in trial, because
Me
I
too.
knew in my gut, I knew that it didn't happen the way it was, and I couldn't wait for this to go to trial. I was like, wait till you see what comes out in trial. This did not happen the way they said it. And what they did, they pulled a fast one. You know what? No trial. And I was like, fuck you guys. You just wasted 2 years of my life, because I knew this shit that didn't happen the way it said it did, and you got away with the plea deal. You sons of bitches. It made me super angry. So at this
Yeah,
point, I'm
well,
just gonna
DA,
screw you
no
guys.
offense.
I want to go home.
Exactly. No offense, DA, but it was people like you why they had to shut this down, right? Because you were doing your due diligence, you were demanding justice, you were doing your research, you were collaborating with other some really amazing creators like Birdie, and you still do, and now me, if I may say, no,
Yeah.
but you were searching for the truth, and so they had to shut this down. And you said why earlier in our interview today, why also they needed to shut this down. They couldn't allow it to come out, as you said, about what really happened. You said so many words with Brian Koberger, et cetera. And I think they needed to shut it down because, again, they know it was a staged crime scene from the get-go, folks. There was no
I think
crime.
on
There was no atrocity, like you've been told. Sir.
I think on that note, you just made a good, what you just sounded like it was a great close. And I know that you had some questions. Maybe let's table. I think you and I will probably talk again. So maybe keep your notes handy. We can cover some of those more later. I want to make sure, because I didn't plug you early. Make sure you guys, if you guys enjoyed Jason and I's banter, I think he's got a great vibe. I think there's a good chemistry on camera between the two of us. If you liked that, please go right now and subscribe to Estey's Crime Maze on YouTube. Give it a like, a subscribe, put your notifications on to see his stuff. He and I don't, of course, as any YouTuber, even Birdie and I, who I go on a lot of, don't see eye to eye on everything. But it's great to get two minds together. If we were just parroting everything that we said back and forth, it would be a boring show. There has to be some differences. So I think it's great that you got that chance to kind of, elaborate on the WITSEC thing and the extraction thing, and really hit that hard at the end. Again, if you guys liked his vibe and his groove, make sure you check out Estey's Crime Maze. Get to subscribe right now. Also for me as well. If you haven't done so, what the hell are you waiting for? Hit like and subscribe right freaking now. Other than that, Jason, thank you so much for taking the time for doing this again. I really liked what we did here. I hope other people like what happened today. I felt good about it. I hope it plays well for us.
Thank you very much, DA, for having me, Devil's Advocates. Lee, you're amazing, and keep up the great work. And it was an absolute pleasure to bounce ideas off one another and talk with you about this ultimately fascinating, crazy, wild case that's now almost kind of finished, as you said, the Idaho 4. Appreciate it. And I'm on Jason Truth Authority on TikTok for what it's worth.
Yeah, Jason Authority. Okay, yeah. Sir. And so I'm sure that we'll have other cases to talk about in the future. And otherwise, have a great day, and I will catch you guys later.